Hello, good evening, and warm welcome at the Thinking Palette platform. As you know that we have started hand-holding program where we are giving the 10 questions to you based on the GS paper 2, GS paper 3 and GS paper 4. Now this is the test first discussion of GS paper 2, and the entire discussion is based on my experience of getting 75 marks in 2013 to 121 marks in 2018. So therefore I will share some of the strategy which I have adopted with respect to GS paper 2, but it will be applicable in GS paper 3, GS paper 4 and GS paper 1 also. So before going into the discussion, first of all we will understand that certain things must be in your mind whenever you are approaching any answer. For example, you should focus on that what are the keywords I can use in my answer. For example, in GS paper 2, you should focus upon that whether I can mention some of the articles or whether I can talk about something contextual based case study in my answer. Then second thing is philosophy of the question you will have to understand, because the question is of two or three statements. You will have to understand that where the demand of the question really falls, rather than it is not that the entire statement is in the question itself. Because what UPSC does, that whenever they form any question, basically framing is based on the certain ideas rather than the entire statement. So you will have to understand that. And the third is basic demand of the question must be made to get at least average or more than average marks. So I will go into details of each and every question considering this in my mind. Okay. So now coming to the first question, that is the basic elements of the doctrine of basic structure is based on the ideas of preamble and Indian national movement. For example, if I change this statement that it is based on idea of constitution, then also you need to understand that I am asking about the ideas of preamble. Okay. So now coming to the doctrine of basic structure. What is the basic information which you need to know? That you need to understand that the doctrine of basic structure is the consequence of Keswananda Bharati case. Understood? But if I ask you that why basic structure or doctrine of basic structure was basically invented by the judiciary, then you will have to go into certain bit historical facts. For example, you need to know about Golaknath case. Then you need to talk about Sankari Prasad case. Okay. Now read the question again. The question is telling that judiciary has just made it more explicit. Therefore, the question is not about the mentioning of Golaknath case and Sankari Prasad case, because the question lies here, that is on the ideas of preamble and Indian national movement rather than on the judiciary. You will have to just make the reference of the judiciary rather than the entire episode of Sankari Prasad case, Golaknath case, Keswananda Bharati case, Article 39B, 39C. No. You will have to just use them in your answer. This is the basic information which you need to know. Now, what is the philosophy of the question? Again, the philosophy of the question does not lie on the judiciary, but it lies on the ideas of Indian national movement and ideas of preamble. So if I ask you what are the ideas of preamble, then you can simply say me that the idea of preamble is sovereignty, secularism, republic, democracy. Okay, and it is also talking about justice, political, economic and social justice. Everything is mentioned in the preamble. So now your answer will revolve around these keywords, and these are the keywords of your answer. So now I will move to that what is the exact demand of the question. For example, you can simply start that the basic structure is the consequence of Keswananda Bharati case. Okay, then you can give an added information that why the basic structure has been invented. It is because some of the ideas are sacrosanct in nature, which cannot be taken by the parliament by the way of amendment. This can be your introduction undoubtedly. Okay, sacrosanct and parliament cannot take it. Now if I go by the Keswananda Bharati case, then basically Chief Justice of 1973, that is Justice S.M. Sikri, He has said that the doctrine of basic structure is simply means first supremacy. Okay, supremacy of what? Supremacy of constitution. Second, he has talked about republic is also a basic structure. Then what do you mean by republic? Republic is basically that the head of the state is directly elected or indirectly elected. Basically, head of the state here is indirectly elected, unlike the monarch in UK. The third thing he has talked about, federalism, is also the basic feature. Understood? So now my answer will revolve around these three only, or can I talk about something more than this? We can talk about something more than this because Justice Y.V. Chandrachud, after this case, has also added some of the phenomenon which is considered as the element of the basic structure. For example, Justice Y.V. Chandrachud has said that right to equality, rule of law, rule of law, and secularism is also an element of the basic structure. Now come to your question and try to understand. It is telling that it is based on the ideas of preamble. So you will have to make a subheading that based on the ideas of preamble. Then you can describe all these ideas of the preamble in one or two lines and can say that judiciary has just made it explicit by understanding that these are sacrosanct and parliament cannot abridge these rights. Understood? Now, coming to the second part, that is basically Indian national movement. You may get confused that how I can relate the Indian national movement to doctrine of basic structure. Basically, for that, you will have to just understand that what were the ideas of Indian national movement. Can you tell me ideas of Indian national movement? If you don't know the ideals of the Indian national movement, then also you can easily write answer if you have Karachi session in your mind. Karachi session 1931. What was this Karachi session all about? The Karachi session has said about equality of status. To whom? To workers and minorities. To workers and minorities. It has also talked about civil liberties. What is civil liberties? Civil liberties simply means about the political, social, and economic liberties which must be given to you. If I extend the meaning of civil liberties, however, if you will think from the narrow point of view, then yes, civil liberties is basically limited to the political rights which you have, but you will have to elaborate on the social and economic rights which were also the ideals of Indian national movement. And the civil liberties is not being talked for the first time in the Karachi session. Whenever you will look at your Swadeshi movement, the first seed for the Indian national movement, at this time also Bal Gangadhar Tilak has talked about civil liberties. So basically, what the judiciary is talking about, that one must be given rights, their fundamental rights should not be taken. Basically, it is mentioned or it is the derivation of the ideals of Indian national movement. Now, this is the basic understanding. Now how can you can make your answer more presentable and can talk something different from the other? What you can do here is you can talk about that the former vice president mr hamid ansari Mr. Hamid Ansari has said that Indian national movement was not a movement to overthrow the British rule. It was not a movement to overthrow the British rule and transfer of political power to the people, but it is the basically a means to provide social and economic justice to the people. Just like Mahatma Gandhi has also said that Swaraj, what was Swaraj? Swaraj was not the transfer of political power, but to establish the social and economic justice in the society. And everything which is mentioned in DPSP, what is talking about in the fundamental rights, revolves around political, social, and economic rights. Therefore, now again coming to the basic structure, what basic structure talks about? Basic structure, if you will relate to the 24th Amendment Act, then you can say that if Parliament is bringing any law to enforce 39B and 39C and even if that law violates Article 14 and 19, then it will not be considered as a void. Then what is 39B and 39C? 39B and 39C is about equitable distribution of resources and non-concentration of the wealth. Now, question comes in your mind that how the equitable distribution of resources can be done. Equitable distribution of the resources will be done if you will provide enough opportunities to the workers, if you will provide enough opportunities to the women, if you will provide enough opportunities to all the marginalized section of the society, then basically you are going to achieve the ideals mentioned in Article 39B and 39C. So basically, in this case only, basic structure will not be applied. However, if you will take the rights other than this, then the basic structure will be implied or will be applied there. So basically, these are the different contents which you can put up in your answer. It depends on that how you are structuring your answer. But again, just for the structuring, you will have to keep in mind that your entire focus should be on the ideals of preamble and ideals of INM. Okay. And after that, you will have to just talk about that judiciary in Keswananda Bharati case has just explicitly talked about all this. That's all. Okay, the idea behind giving this question, because you all know about the criticism of basic structure, you all know about the positive of the basic structure, but UPSC does something very differently. Then basically they may ask you to check your entire understanding of the integration of the science, integration of the history and the constitution. Understood? Now moving to the second question, that is Government of India Act 1935 was informed by a need to protect British interest rather than promoting self-government in India. Critically examine. Then what is the basic information which you require? Basic information simply means that you must be aware of the features of Government of India Act, and then you must be aware that why it has been criticized by INC, Muslim League, okay, and it has been criticized by the different scholars. For example, I can talk about Andrew, and then I can talk about G.A. Gallagher, J.A. Gallagher. Okay, basically they have criticized the entire Government of India Act 1935. His name was Andrew Muldoon. Okay, so now this is the basic information which we need to know. You may not know about this name, but this is not going to make a very this is not going to impact your answer in any way. Just you will have to understand the features and the criticism by INC and Muslim League. Then obviously you can easily approach this answer. Now philosophy of this question. Philosophy of this question is basically requiring you to talk more about the negatives of the Government of India Act 1935. But it is not that you will only talk about the negatives. You will have to first talk about that what was the feature. Then only you can talk about that what was the issue with the Government of India Act 1935. Now, Government of India Act 1935 is a very favorite topic of UPSC, and they have asked question from this two times. Okay, so now coming to what is the exact demand. For example, in introduction, what you can do, you can go to the history, and then you can talk about the Government of India Act has 10 parts, 11 schedule, you can say, or you can say that this act was enacted to basically change the entire dynamics of the British rule in India. But for that, you will have to understand that what was the basic intention behind bringing this Government of India Act 1935. Basically, you can use some of the points from here in your introduction also. For example, the intention was, what was the intention? Intention was to make moderates happy. The intention was to make members of Muslim League happy. But the question is how? How much simply means that the moderates were demanding only for डोमिनियन स्टेटस. एक्चुअली मॉडरेट्स जो थे वो थोड़े से में खुश हो जाते थे, तो ब्रिटिशर भी सोचे कि चलो थोड़ा सा दे देंगे. तो थोड़ा सा दे देने वाली जो बात है डोमिनियन स्टेटस की, इट वाज मेंशन्ड इन 1931 स्टैचू. It was mentioned in 1931 statute that we will give dominion status to India. So basically, to make moderates happy, they have just brought the Government of India Act 1935 and tried to elude them that okay, with the coming time we will also give you right to self determination, but be happy right now with this arrangement of the provincial autonomy and everything. We will look into that. And how to make Muslim League happy. Basically, if you will accept any of the Jinnah's 14 point, then basically you are making the Muslim League happy. So they have also accepted some of the features of the demand of Jinnah in the 14 points. What was the another intention? The another intention was to keep the control of British India over the Indian finance and India's foreign relation. India's foreign relation, and therefore there was a separate clause in this Government of India Act with respect to Burma. Understood? So this was the basic intention. You can use any of these points in your introduction, highlighting the historical part of the question. Understood? Now we will move into that. What was the important feature of Government of India Act 1935 and what was the issue? Now, feature. The very first feature we all know that the provincial autonomy has been given to them. Second is bicameralism was introduced. Third is adult franchise. For the first time, direct election has been talked in this Government of India Act. Then you can talk about that there is an arrangement of federal, provincial, and joint public commissions. Joint public commission. So these were the features. Okay. Now, provincial autonomy. Whenever you will look into 1919 Act, then you will find that the provinces are at the mercy of the center. Provinces are at the mercy of the center. But Government of India Act 1935 abolished diarchy and provided autonomy to the provinces and provided for the bicameralism. And this was one of the important, you can say that it is not that the bicameralism has been introduced for the first time, okay, but the election of the bicameralism or election for the members of the bicameralism is considered as one of the important features that the Government of India Act 1935 has provided. But now we will move into that what is the issue with the Government of India Act 1935. Basically, this Government of India Act 1935 is called as defective federalism. Why they are called as a defective federalism? Because in one of the feature they are telling that the provinces will be represented in the center. But how the provinces will be presented in the center? There is no any method of direct election by the people, but the native players are nominating and they are the representative of provinces in the center. This is basically a kind of indirect federalism rather than direct federalism. Then basically they are also talking about that the states or you can say provinces, it is compulsory for the provinces to join the all India federation, but it is not compulsory for the princely state. Okay. Why they have done why they have done this arrangement that not making compulsory for the princely estates but for the provinces? It is because no matter what government come in power in future, that government should not have enough power to topple the entire governance according to their demand, because Britisher also knew that the Congress may come into power, but the Congress should not have enough representation so that they can change the entire government. Therefore, the princely estates representation has been made voluntary, not mandatory. This is the first issue with the Government of India Act 1935. Now, the second issue with the Government of India Act 1935 is overpower, or you can say governor has been provided with utmost power. How? Basically, the Government of India Act 1935 says that there will be a Minister of Law portfolio. Okay, it simply means that the law portfolio will be managed by responsible minister. Okay, but at the same time, this act says that the entire process of maintaining peace and tranquility is the responsibility of the governor, not of this minister of the law. What is this? Basically, you are overpowering the governor and governor general. Now, the second issue is governor have a final say in the preparation of the budget. It is not that the provincial legislature or the central legislature is determining or is determining each and everything with respect to the preparation of the budget, but it is the governor which is determining. Then the third issue with respect to overpowering the governor is flow of funds. Flow of funds to different provinces is being decided by the governor rather than legislature. This is the second issue with respect to Government of India Act 1935. Now the third issue with the Government of India Act 1935, that right of self-determination. Right of self-determination has not been given to the Indians. Then what is right of self-determination? It simply means that whenever you will give right of self-determination, they can form their constitution and amend that constitution also. This power has not been given. Okay, therefore I was talking about the dominion status was the basic objective of the Government of India Act 1935 rather than giving the complete power of making the constitution. This was the third issue with Government of India Act 1935. Now the fourth issue with the Government of India Act 1935 is communalization. How they have communalized or poisoned the entire political atmosphere. It has been done by extending communal electorate to Harijans, laborers. Basically, why they have provided the communal or the separate electorate for certain sections like Harijan. It is just to divide the Hindu community, okay, and just to poison the entire political atmosphere. So basically, in this context, Andrew Muldoon has said that the government, I am writing it so that you can use in examination also. Okay. So Andrew Muldoon has said the Government of India Act has an intention to deflect the energy, or you can also say to deflect the criticism of British Raj by Gandhi and Nehru and other nationalist leaders. Other nationalist leaders. Okay. And Jay Gallagher has also said that the Government of India Act 1935 had an intention to rather than revive its working rather than changing the course of administration of British India. Changing the course of administration of British India. Okay, this you can use without using his name. His name was J.A. Gallagher. Gallagher, okay? And this is Andrew Muldoon. Understood? So basically, this is a kind of criticism, and INC has also criticized the Government of India Act 1935 that it is a slave constitution. It is a slave constitution that has been enacted to perpetuate economic bondage of India. Understood? So these are the different commentary on the Government of India Act 1935. If you are putting this commentary in your answer, obviously it will give an enrichment to your answer. So basically what you need to do in this question, you will have to first talk in introduction about the history, that the Government of India Act 1935 was basically presented by the Joint Committee of the British Parliament headed by Lord Linlithgow. It has 10 parts, 11 schedule, and its basic objective was to retain the power or to revive the power of the British India rather than providing or promoting self-government in India. After that, you can start by mentioning the features of Government of India and criticism of the Government of India. 4 or 5 points in the basic feature and 4 or 5 points of the criticism, and then you can use the commentary of any out of these. This will be the end of your answer. Understood? But what you will do in the conclusion, because most of the students finds difficulty in mentioning the conclusion. So basically, in conclusion, you can say that the Government of India Act has or had the intention of the Britisher to continue their rule, but it cannot be denied at the same time that Government of India Act 1935 is the basis or one of the important pillar of the Indian Constitution, because most of the items in our Indian Constitution has been taken from Government of India Act 1935. So this can be your conclusion. Understood? Now moving to the third question, that is political decentralization consequent to 73rd Amendment has been evenly spread across the state, but not fiscal and functional decentralization. In the light of the statement, also highlight the effectiveness of PRI in achieving the SDG goals. Now, such kind of question, you all know about the political decentralization, but such kind of question creates problem that where to focus and how much to focus, whether we should focus only on fiscal functional, or we should just giving a passing reference of SDG goal, or whether we should divide our answer equally. So basically it depends on the statement of the question, but in this question we will have to talk about something substantial with respect to fiscal functional and also PRI. Now, what is the basic information required? Whatever you can do in such kind of question, you can start your answer from Article 40, or you can start your answer that it is based on the idea of democratic decentralization or oceanic circles of decentralization of Mahatma Gandhi. Okay. Now, after that, what is the basic information which you need to know? We need to understand that if I ask you that how you will define the success of PRI. If I ask very simple question to you, then what is the answer which is coming in your mind? Just take a pause of 1 second or 2 seconds and think that what is the different parameters on which you will understand the success of PRI. Why I am putting emphasis on that? Because I can write any answer on 73rd Amendment or on the PRI considering these 5 or 6 important pillars. For example, success of PRI. For me, success for you it may be different. But for me, success of PRI depends on whether the election is happening at the time or not, whether the functionaries have been devolved to them or not, what is the status of working of Gram Sabha, whether the DPC has been constituted or not, whether the accountability of the Gram Sabha has been checked or not, or whether women are playing a greater role in the PRI or not. These are the 5 or 6 important pillars on which I can divide my answer. But here, the question is demanding you to focus on fund and function rather than focusing on DPC, Gram Sabha, and accountability and women. So basically, we will limit ourselves to the fiscal and functional decentralization. But the very important demand of the question is here. You will have to give certain examples of the different states where you find that in some of the states there has been a better fiscal and functional decentralization, and in some of the states it has been centralized with the state government. So basically this question demands not only an analysis but also your knowledge with respect to the political decentralization. Understood? So now we will move into that what is the exact demand of the question. So now coming to the election, how many gram panchayat we have today? 2.5 lakhs. How many elected representative we have? 32 lakh. How many women elected representative we have? 14 lakh. Basically, after introduction, if you are talking about this and it is happening in all the states, so basically you have met the demand of the first part of the question, that the political decentralization is evenly spread because the election is happening in all the states with a certain required frequency, and this is the condition or this is the data to satisfy your argument. Now coming to funds and functionaries. Just I am talking about function also so that you can use in another answer. Funds. Now, if you will look into the funds, then you all know that Article 243H. What is Article 243H? Article 243H says that a state should devolve the power of taxation to panchayat. So whether they are doing this, obviously they are not doing this, okay? But it is not evenly spread across the states, okay? So we will have to give certain example. Now I am giving the example. For example, Madhya Pradesh. Whenever you will look into the Madhya Pradesh panchayats and their capacity to raise the revenue, then you will find that about 55 to 60 crore rupees only the panchayat in Madhya Pradesh can generate. When you will compare to Andhra Pradesh, then you will find that about 500 crore of the funds is being um, about 500 crore funds is being arranged by the panchayat themselves. Like Haryana panchayats have a capacity to raise 270 crore approximately on their own. But this data simply says that it is not evenly distributed. Some of the states are distributing it well, some of the states are not. Now, this figure also reflects one thing, that the state of Andhra Pradesh has given enough financial devolution to the panchayat whenever you will compare to the Madhya Pradesh. Okay, this is the understanding of the question. If you are putting the things in such a lucid manner, obviously it will not be a burden for the examiner, or examiner will also feel deburdened, and therefore he will not hesitate to give you the marks. Understood? Now, in the case of Madhya Pradesh, I want to add one more thing here, that the Madhya Pradesh has a provision of separate budget. Sorry, I should not use the separate budget. There is a separate provision in the budget of the Madhya Pradesh where they are allocating the funds for the panchayat. So this is all about the fund which you can talk in your answer. Now coming to the functions. What are the functions? Functions are basically nothing but 29 items which are mentioned in 11th schedule is the function. Now if I ask you that how it is spread across the states, then again we will have to look into that how the different states have basically devolved the functions mentioned in the 11th schedule. Now whenever you will look into Haryana, then the entire 29 subjects have been devolved to the panchayat. Whenever you will look into Madhya Pradesh, then you will find that 18 items have been devolved to the panchayat. Whenever you will look into the Kerala has devolved even the multi-speciality hospital to the panchayat. All the schools, hospitals, healthcare infrastructure in Kerala has been devolved to the panchayat. This is about the functions, and it is again representing that it is not evenly distributed. Understood? Now coming to functionaries. But before going into functionaries, can you collect the basic functionaries of the panchayat? The basic functionaries of the panchayat is our Gram Rojgar Sevak. Gram Rojgar Sevak, Gram Panchayat Secretary, Gram Panchayat Secretary. These are the basically functionaries. And whenever you will look into Kerala, they have technical corps. They call them volunteer technical corps. Basically, the job of this volunteer technical groups corps is to give technical advice to DPC, that is District Planning Committee, with respect to plan and planning. And this Gram Panchayat or secretary, what they do? Basically, this Gram Panchayat secretary is responsible for organizing Gram Sabha meetings. Then who is Gram Rojgar Sevak? Who keeps the details of all the operational activities in the panchayat and who organizes everything, because he is the lower rung officer. Okay. So now again, it is unevenly distributed. If you will look into Kerala, I have given the example of Kerala. Like in Madhya Pradesh, what happened? That all the officers at the district and sub-district level, at, at the level of this, that is the panchayat secretary, is working under the panchayat. So basically, this has been done in MP, this has been done in Kerala, but it is not evenly distributed across all the states. It is not that in all the states the officer of the panchayat secretary level is working under PRI, because in majority of the states you will find that the state are appointing the panchayat secretary, and even in some of the cases you will find that there is no any panchayat secretary, because the state does not take panchayati raj institution with a great enthusiasm, you can say. Okay, so this is all about with respect to the fiscal and functional decentralization. Now we have talked about only 50% of the demand of the question. Now we will move to effectiveness of PRI in dealing with or in achieving the ideas of sustainable development goal. Now, to address this question, you can talk about that SDG has 169 targets, 17 goals. Okay. Now, before going into too much detail of the SDG and how the PRI can be involved in achieving the ideals of SDG, you will have to understand the basic philosophy of the PRI. What is the basic philosophy of the PRI? Basic philosophy of the PRI is participation. ओके, पार्टिसिपेशन से क्या होगा? कम्युनिटी डेवलपमेंट. कम्युनिटी डेवलपमेंट से क्या होगा? वट एवर द गोल गवर्नमेंट हैज सेट विल बी रिसीव्ड. ओके, सेकंड थिंग, planning and monitoring. You all know about the social auditing, and you can use the points of the social auditing here in your answer, that how the involvement of the panchayati raj institutions will increase or will make the planning robust and monitoring efficient. Okay, understood? Now third, convergence of the three tier of panchayat. What are the three tier of the panchayat? You all know, that is gram sabha, gram panchayat and jila parishad. The convergence of all the three, and best example is Bihar. Bihar has a program of Sat Nishchay. In Sat Nishchay or in Seven Nishchay, basically they took 7 initiatives, or they took places to complete 7 initiatives with respect to infrastructure, with respect to education, everything, and that will be converged across the three different tiers of the panchayat. And basically, in order to do that, we will achieve the SDG goals. Understood? Now, the fourth thing we can relate it to the how the PRI can help in achieving the SDG goal is convergence of a scheme. Convergence of a scheme. And the best example for this is Assam. In Assam, there is a scheme called Samagra Gram Unayan Yojana. Samagra Gram Unyan Yojana. So basically, there is a convergence of the scheme which have an impact on a particular stakeholder. They are converged together. So in this way, you can open the dimension of PRI role in the SDG goal. Now I can tell you one very basic thing that without knowing all these, you can easily answer. How you can easily answer? Just I am giving you one example. For example, what is SDG 1? SDG 1 is to eliminate poverty and SDG 2 is to eliminate hunger. यही है. अब तुम्हें कुछ नहीं पता है, तो अब मुझे बताओ कि पॉवर्टी और हंगर खत्म कैसे होंगे? खत्म होंगे 3 चीज से. कैसे होंगे? आइडेंटिफाई, इनरोल एंड इंश्योर. अब बोलोगे ये क्या है सर? तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल यू विल हैव टू आइडेंटिफाई द बेनिफिशियरी. Identify the beneficiary and enroll them in that particular scheme, from where they can get food grains, from where they can get free education, from where they can get free healthcare services. Enroll and ensure that they are getting their rights properly without any interruption. This is basically, you can also give such dimension to your answer by taking the example of 1 or 2 SDG. In another word, you can also talk about the same thing, that they can help in planning, they can help in participation. Okay, so basically, if you can remember these 5 keywords: identify, enroll, ensure, plan, participation. So basically, you can write any answer on how the PRI is going to achieve the SDG goal by dividing your entire answer on these 5 keywords. Understood? This is the basically This is the idea of understanding that what you need to do means answer writing. It is not that you will join in a test series and you will come across the ideas of writing the answer. You will have to focus on mains answer writing program, where you need to write something rather than just for the sake of the writing. Okay, so try to open the dimensions like this. Now, moving to the next question, that is the recent taxation institutional reform by the government has brought a new challenges to the financial federalism. This is very tough question, I think, for you all. But okay, I will make it very simple for you. Now, this question has basically three parts, I will say. The first part, that you must have an idea of financial federalism. Second part, you must understand that by the word taxation I mean GST, and by word institutional reform I mean Niti Aayog and 14th and 15th Finance Commission. If you understand this is the basic demand of the question, then you can easily address this answer. Okay, now what is the philosophy of the question? Philosophy of the question revolves around that how you can empower your state in the era of cooperative financial federalism. Do you think that the state needs to be fiscally empowered? Basically, you need to focus upon, whenever you will look into the entire GST and the need of the financially empowered state, then you will understand that the philosophy of the question somewhere revolves around the need to make our state empowered. Okay, so we will write answer in such a way that till the conclusion there must be some impression to the examiner that you have talked about empowering the state. Understood? No, but before that, we will understand that how we can start such question. That is fiscal federalism. Simply start that the fiscal federalism is nothing but a distribution of power of taxation. Distribution of power of taxation between center and states. That's all. And to make it more substantial, you can add Article 268 to 293 talks about financial federalism. This is the important thing which you can use in your introduction. Now, coming to taxation. Now, you will have to understand that taxation is a sovereign concept, and taxation basically depends on who is imposing and who is collecting it. Okay, now, the most important dimension of the taxation is that how the revenues are being used. According to some of the scholars, they are of the view that it does not matter that who is imposing, who is collecting. Even the C. Rangarajan, you all have heard about C. Rangarajan. इस गवर्नमेंट में तो सी रंगाराजन गायब हो गए, लेकिन जब हम तैयारी करते थे 2015 तक सी रंगाराजन बहुत ही ज्यादा फेमस पर्सनालिटी थे. So C. Rangarajan has said that the basic idea of the financial federalism is to equally divide the resource and efficiently use the resource. That's all. This is the meaning of fiscal federalism. So now we will come into that how the GST and why we are talking about that GST is posing a financial federalism. But we will have to talk about in the positive connotation that GST is also very good in terms of increasing tax compliance and whatever we have achieved after the imposition of GST, rather than putting only negativities of the GST. Understood? So now coming to the important content of your answer. This is the points which I have discussed to make a boundary and introduction of your question. So now GST. What is the positive of GST? GST is about harmonization of taxes. देखो तुम्हें लिंक समझना है, मैं लिंक बनाता हूं, बस तुम्हें लिखना है अपने से. हार्मोनाइजेशन ऑफ टैक्सेस. हार्मोनाइजेशन ऑफ टैक्सेस का क्या रिजल्ट है? कैस्केडिंग ऑफ टैक्सेस खत्म हो गए. इसका इंपैक्ट क्या है? कंप्लायंस बढ़ गए, टैक्स अवॉइडेंस घट गए. इसका बेनिफिट क्या है? गवर्नमेंट के जो तुम्हारे रेवेन्यू है, it will increase, and it has been shown in the budget session that about 17 million कॉर्पोरेशन टैक्स में हमारा इंक्रीज, सॉरी 17% इंक्रीज हुआ है कॉर्पोरेशन टैक्स में. And also tax base have increased from 6.2 million before GST to 11.2 million. This is the success of GST, and you are required to talk about this. However, the question is asking that it is the threat to the fiscal federalism, and now you will start your answer with the critical understanding of the GST. So, what is the critical analysis of the GST? The very first thing is delay in compensation. Whenever you have signed the GST, you have promised to the state that you will be compensated for the next coming 5 years, but you are not compensating them. They are telling that they are already short of 50% of their revenue, and you are not giving them compensation. Second issue with the GST has been found that whenever you will compare the data of October 2019 to October 2018, then you will find that there is a dip of 5.8% in terms of collection of GST. ओके, तो ये तो इम्पैक्ट करेगा ना, कलेक्शन ऑफ जीएसटी कम हुआ है तो डिले इन कंपनसेशन होगा. तो दिस इज द इश्यू विद द जीएसटी. नेक्स्ट इश्यू इज जीएसटी काउंसिल. The structure of GST Council reveals that whoever will have the 2/3 of the votes, it will win. और इसमें वेटेज कैसे डिसाइड है? वेटेज सॉरी 1 मिनट. GST Council we were talking about. Okay, GST Council says that 1/3 of the votes will be with the center and 2/3 of the vote will be the state. And on the matter where the 75% of the vote falls, that matter will be decided by GST Council. Now, it looks like that the states have a more weightage than the center. But if the center can garner the vote from 5 to 6 states, then the power of the center will be more than the state, and it can defeat any proposal in the GST Council. So basically, this is considered as against the financial federalism. Now, coming to the different recommendation of the commissions, that is the Finance Commission. Because the question is the recent taxation and institutional reform. So basically, Finance Commission, that whenever you will look into 14th Finance Commission, then you will find that the devolution has been increased from 32 to 42%. Second is basic and performance grant is being given to Gram Sabha or Gram Panchayat and municipal bodies. So basically, this is not a challenge to the fiscal federalism, but the challenge comes with the 15th Finance Commission. What is the challenge? 15th Finance Commission says that the population census of 2011 will be used. So basically, southern states are apprehensive of that. That if we have controlled the population for last 70 years, then what is our fault? Our fault is only that we have controlled the population, because the devolution will be decreased according to the 2011 population. And the second is they are using the performance parameter in determining the devolution of the funds. And one of the parameters of the performance index, that how the states have performed in deepening of GST tax rate. Now you can understand that Maharashtra and Manipur. Now compare Maharashtra and Manipur. Do you think that the Manipur can ever in the future deepen the GST tax net in the same proportion as Maharashtra can do? Never. So basically, it is a kind of threat to the northeastern states and some of the other states in comparison to Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu. So basically, this is against the idea of cooperative federalism. Understood? Now, we will move into the second part of our issue, that is what is the concern of the state. So now, do you think that the state needs to be fiscally empowered and to give leading role? So to answer that, you will have to understand that what is the demand of the state. If you understand that what is the demand of the state in financial federalism, then it will be very easy for you to understand or to answer this question. So now, what is the demand of the state? But before that, you will have to understand that why the demand of the state is justified. For example, they are telling that according to FRBM Act, the fiscal reduction in fiscal deficit target has been fixed for all the states. why it has been fixed for all the states? Basically, it is a kind of one size fits all approach. So they are telling that the states having a good revenue or a lesser or a very narrow revenue deficits must be given more ambit of working in terms of the raising capital rather than reduction in the fiscal deficit targeting should be fixed. They are of this view. Second is compliance. For example, center is making Forest Conservation Act, Wildlife Protection Act, and the compliance and the burden of compliance depends on the state. Then states are telling that you will have to give us some funds to comply with the act which you are enacting. We are not enacting. A state legislature is not enacting these acts. You are enacting, so give us funds. Understood? Now, the third demand of the state is with respect to 12 5-year plan. 12 5-year plan says that for inclusive and sustainable development, we need to focus on agriculture, education, infrastructure, and most of the items which 12 5-year plan has talked about basically falls either in a state list or concurrent list. So they are telling that if our development is based on the items mentioned in the state list, then there must be a strong voice of the state rather than of the center. So these are the demand of the state, and in this context we need to empower our state. Okay. And also in the case of pandemic, you can see that how the Kerala has performed. Kerala has been one of the case study to justify this demand that states need to be fiscally empowered. Understood? So basically, this is the demand of the question, and you can easily talk about the GST, Finance Commission, and why a state needs to be fiscally empowered in the question of you can say in the question of vertical and horizontal inequality in the financial federalism. Understood? So in introduction you are required to talk about the articles and the part 5 of the Indian Constitution that will give an indication that you are writing answer on the polity paper or GS paper. Now, moving to the question number 5, that is, careful study of constitutional provision reveals that doctrine of separation of power has not been accepted in its watertight understanding because of its unfeasibility and undesirability. It's simply saying that in the context of India, it is not feasible and not desirable. So basic information which is required for you, that what do you understand by the term separation of power, and you can also give the name of the person who has given the concept of the separation of power and can define that what is SOP. Now the philosophy of the question is basically that whatever the SOP has said by the Montesquieu is not valid in the context of India, and therefore we will have to look into that why it is not valid in the case of India in its watertight compartment. Okay, so basically in the demand of the question we will find out that what are the different provisions in the constitution with respect to separation of power, and then in the practical sense we will look into that whether it is in the watertight compartment or whether there is the functional overlapping. This is basically philosophy and the demand of the question. So now basically Montesquieu in 1747 published in his book, that is the Spirit of Laws. This was the book in which Montesquieu has talked about the doctrine of separation of power. And doctrine of separation of power says that one organ of the government should not interfere into the another organ. For example, executive should not interfere here and legislature should not interfere here. Now the second thing that this doctrine says that a person from one organ of the government should not be the part of the another organ of the government. For example, a member who is in the judiciary should not be the part of legislature, and a member who is the part of the executive should not be the part of the legislature. Understood? And the third thing is that one organ of the government should not exercise functions of the other organ of the government. Okay, so basically this is the simple understanding of the separation of power in its watertight compartment. Now you can see whenever I will talk about that where there is a functional overlapping, then you can relate it to the watertight understanding of the separation of power, which is not feasible in the case of India. Understood? So now, first of all, we will talk about that what are the different features in the Indian Constitution with respect to separation of power. So first of all, we will look into legislature and judiciary. We all know that Article 211 and 121. What is this article all about? This article says that Parliament and state legislature should not conduct or should not discuss the judicial function of judges of Supreme Court and High Court. It should not be discussed in the Parliament. This is the first thing. Then there is also mentioning of Article 368. Article 368 gives an amending power to the legislature, that is Parliament, and the judiciary will not come into play until and unless that law violates the basic structure of the Constitution. So basically now you can also see that there is an overlapping because the Constitution says that the legislature will have the amending power and now the judiciary is entering into it. So basically this is a functional overlapping. Okay. So now second point, executive and judiciary. The doctrine of separation of power is reflected in Article 50 of Indian Constitution, which talks about the separation. The third thing, legislature and executive. Now Article 53 and 154 says that the executive power of the president and executive power of the governor shall be vested where it will be vested. So basically the executive power of the union and the state will be vested in president and governor respectively with respect to Article 53 and 154. So this is basically the separation of power mentioned in the Constitution of India. However, I will take the support of the two Supreme Court cases to substantiate that in the case of India, there is a functional overlapping. So first case is Ram Javaya versus State of Punjab. In this case, Supreme Court has said that SOP, that is doctrine of separation of power, is not fully accepted in India. Okay, and in the next case, that is Indira Gandhi versus Raj Narayan case. In this case, the Supreme Court has said that neither it has been accepted in the watertight because there is a functional overlapping between different organs of the government. Now we will look into the practical application that where there is an functional overlapping. Understood? So now again what we will do, we will look into that what is the functional overlapping between legislature and judiciary, and then we will also look into what is the functional overlapping between executive and judiciary. So now legislature and executive, for example ordinance. Okay, who has the power to make the law? Obviously legislature, but who is making the ordinance? President. Okay, so basically the president is doing on the aid and advice of council of ministers. This is the overlapping of the executive and legislature. Likewise money bill. Okay, money bill is being said that Article 1110 of the Indian Constitution that the money bill must be presented in the Lok Sabha only. But again, who is doing the or who is certifying it? A speaker is certifying it, that where the bill is a money bill or financial bill. Now third, we can talk about anti-defection. Again there is a functional overlapping between executive and the legislature. So this is a functional overlapping. Now executive and judiciary. Now coming to executive and judiciary. Now we will look into that how there is a functional overlapping between these two organs. For example, appointment of judges. We all know that the appointment of judges is being done by the president, but when the president will do it? Only when the government says to the president that appoint X or Y or Z as a president. Okay, appoint X, Y, Z as the judge of the Supreme Court. Then only the president will do this. Understood? Now the second thing. For example, whenever you want to initiate any action against UPSC member or CVC, why you are asking to the Supreme Court? Basically, when you are asking to the Supreme Court for his removal, then this is a functional overlapping. Now, the third part is tribunals. Whenever you will look into the judicial structure, then nowhere you will find that the tribunal is a part of the judicial structure. And Justice Hidayatullah has also said once that the tribunal is basically a part of executive directives, not the judicial functions. So basically, therefore, tribunals will not come under the judiciary in the correct sense, but there is a functional overlapping between the judiciary and executive, as tribunals is doing the quasi judicial function. Understood? So basically, this is the demand of the question. First, you have talked about that what is separation of power, and then you have talked about that what is its watertight compartment. Then you have talked about the Indian condition with respect to what is mentioned in the constitution and what is in its practicality. Okay, now we are moving to question number 6. The question number 6 says that the president of world's largest and oldest democracy has a contrast in terms of power and position, which has a root in the process of their appointment. Okay, so basically the entire statement of this question falls here, and therefore you need to talk about certain aspects of the appointment of the US president, and by comparing it with the election of Indian president. This is the first thing which you should keep in your mind. Now, question second, I'll also elaborate briefly on the difference of their power. So basically, it is also expected from you that you will talk about the difference in the power of the US president and Indian president. Basically, a comparison need to be made. Okay. So basic information here is you need to know about the power and you need to know about the process of appointment. The philosophy of the question, what you can do here is you can talk something about the philosophy behind this question. This question looks very tough, but it is very simple. If you understand that, you will have to talk about parliamentary versus presidential system. Okay, what happens in parliamentary system? Then you can say that the president is the head of the state. What happens in presidential system? That the president is the head of the state and head of the government both. This is the philosophy, state plus government. Now we will look into the basic demand of this question. So first you should understand that what are the difference in the power. The very first power is with respect to veto. Now, we all know that the suspensive veto is being enjoyed by the Indian and USA president. But what is the difference? For example, if the Indian president is sending back the bill, then the bill, if again comes to the president, then president needs to give his assent. Okay. The same happens in this case. But then you will tell, sir, what is the difference? So basically, in this case, the bill is returned after passing it by simple majority. But in this case, the bill is being returned after passing it by the special majority, that is two-third majority. Okay. Second, he also enjoys absolute veto, US president. Basically, he can veto the acts by the legislature. Veto the acts by the legislature. This is the first difference in the power. Second, basically, what happens in India, that the impeachment of the president is equally done by the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. Basically, resolution must be passed by the both the houses. However, whenever you will look into the US, that it is solely lies in the hands of Senate. Okay. Now, the third difference in the terms of power you can talk about, that the cabinet members, the members of the cabinet in US is appointed by the president, and they can appointed plus removed. Both will be done by the president. Now you will say, sir, in India also it happens, but in India it is being done on the aid and advice of the Council of Minister. But there is no any such arrangement of the Council of Minister in the case of USA. Everything is the president, because he is the head of the government and head of the state both. So basically you need to understand only this. If you understand that this is the demand of the question, or this is the philosophy behind the question, then you can easily write all these points. Okay, so now coming to the process of election in the US, because you all know about the process of election of the president in India, that it is being done by the proportional representation plus single transferable vote system, and MLAs are participating in the election of the president. Okay, this you all know, but we should know about the election of the USA president. To understand the USA president election, you will have to understand this term, primaries plus caucus. What is this primaries and caucus? Then I will talk about national convention. Then I can talk about the direct election between the nominee. Okay, for example, in the last US election, the direct nominee was Trump and Hillary Clinton. But how we will come to the conclusion that the Trump and Hillary Clinton will be the nominee for the election of the US president? But for that, we will have to go to the primaries and caucus and the national convention. Now understand, I am just taking the example of California, for example. However, we know that there are 50 states and the state of Colombia which participates in the election of the USA. For example, California. There are two important parties. There are only two parties, that is Republican Party and Democrat Party. Okay. Now, the people living in California, or the members of the Republican Party and the members of the Democrat Party, will elect their delegates from the towns, from the mohallas, from the villages of the California. The same will happen by the Republic. They will also appoint their delegates. Now you will say, sir, this is primaries or caucus? Basically, this is primaries if it happens through the method of secret voting. Okay, basically, this is the arrangement in some of the states of the USA, that the delegates will be elected by the secret voting. However, caucus simply means that the people or the members of the party will raise their hand and will say that this is my delegate. So this happens also in some of the states. For example, in 16 states of USA, caucus happens, and in the rest primaries happens. Okay. So first of all, they are electing their delegate. Now what happens to this delegate? For example, if there are 50 delegates of the Republican and 30 delegates of the Democratic Party have been elected by primaries and caucus, then basically this 50 and 30 will go for the national convention. And what happens here? There is a stadium, for example, or any conference room, where these delegates will define that who will be their nominee, and that nominee will go for the election. Both are indirect election. Indian president is also appointed by the indirect election, and the US president is also appointed by the indirect election. But you can understand, or you can feel the difference between the appointment process of the US president and the Indian president. This is all you require to write in your answer. Okay, so this is the demand of the question. Now moving to the next question, that is, an old British adage says that once a speaker, always a speaker, which signifies the impartiality of the office of a speaker. Critically examine the role of a speaker in India. Okay, so what is the basic information which you should know? Basic information that, for example, question is asking you to critically analyze the role of the speaker. So first of all, you should know what is the role of a speaker. Then only you can critically analyze the role of a speaker. And here you will have to highlight some of the current incidents which happened in the case of the speaker. Okay, I will come to that whenever I will talk about what is the exact demand. Then what is the philosophy of the question? Then you can talk about the speaker and his pivotal role in the house or the floor of the house. So basically here also you can make a comparison with UK and Germany, New Zealand. You can make the Ireland. You can make the comparison of the speaker of India with the speaker of UK and Ireland. Okay, so basically this is the basic information. Now coming to the exact demand. Now understand that what is the speaker, or what is the role of the speaker. Now you can tell 10, 12 role of the speaker, but the entire role of the speaker can be clubbed under these three. For example, to maintain the decorum of the house, this is the first job. Second is to facilitate the business of the house, to facilitate the business. And the third is to act as a or to perform a judicial function. Now, when the speaker performs judicial function during the anti-defection law, when he will facilitating the business, when he is accepting motions, resolution, motion of no confidence or any resolution or the motion of the general public importance will come under the head of facilitating business. Decorum of the house, maintaining decorum of the house means he is acting as a disciplinarian. Okay, and basically whenever you have watched the debate of the budget session or any session, you have heard the word expunged. So basically when something is spoken by the MP which is non-parliamentary word, then it is being expunged so that there cannot be chaos, or so that to check the chaos by the opposition party. So basically that is the job of the speaker, to maintain the decorum of the house. The entire role of the speaker is being asked. So first of all, you will have to define the role. Now I will come to the critical examination of the role. Now what you can do, you can just think of that what are the different functions performed by the speaker. For example, anti-defection law, for example in case of motion acceptance, for example in case of privilege motion. Okay, now coming to ADL, or for example you can talk also about that the certification of money bill, that any bill is a money bill or not will be certified by the speaker. And recently we have seen in the Aadhaar case what happened, that it has been alleged that it was a finance bill and it has been passed as a money bill. How? Because it was certified by the speaker, and the question on the post of the speaker obviously will be raised. Privilege motion. Now, what is privilege motion? When there is any breach of privilege, then what the speaker should do, that the speaker should send that matter to the privilege committee. But in most of the case, it has been seen that he is not sending matter to the privilege committee, rather trying to solve on his own. Okay. Now motion, he will have to accept the motion. It is not that it is on the that it is not that it is a bar on the speaker, or it is a limitation that he must do. But whenever you are enjoying the certain parliamentary post, then you should not act only as an impartial, but you should also look that you are acting as an impartial manner. So basically it has been seen that in the post budget session of 2018, what happened, that the no confidence motion has been raised against the government, and the speaker has not accepted this. Okay, what he can do, he should accept the no confidence motion. Now it is entirely based on that whether the ruling government enjoys confidence or not. Then what is the role of the speaker here? A speaker has not played his role in an impartial manner. Understood? Now anti-defection law, it has been seen recently in the case of Arunachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, that the speaker has disqualified the member of the ruling class. A speaker has disqualified on his own. What anti-defection law says? That whenever any member resigns, or the member is voting against the party, then only the speaker should disqualify him. But in the case of Arunachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, it has been observed that a speaker is doing on his own. So basically, this is the critical examination of the speaker. Now, I can also put one point, that is, there is a claim of prejudice, that the speaker is acting as a prejudice. For example, what happened, that the speaker in Tamil Nadu has dismissed AIDMK leader. 6 AIDMK leaders have been basically put out of the floor of the house, and that speaker belongs to DMK. It has been seen that he has acted on the basis of his prejudice. This is the critical analysis of the speaker. Now, as a measure, what you can do, suggest a measure that how the speaker can act as an impartial manner. For example, again you can use ADL. What can happen in the ADL? You can give the suggestion that the matter under the ADL should be defined by any neutral body or election commission. You can give the suggestion. Money bill, whether the bill is a money bill should not be in the sole discretion of the speaker, but it should be decided by parliamentary committee. Next suggestion you can give, that like in UK and Ireland, once the speaker is appointed on the post, then he must resign from his party to ensure the impartiality. In this case, the former Speaker of the Lok Sabha, T.N. Sagma, has said that a speaker must know rules, convention, and constitution in order to perform the role of the speaker. This can be your conclusion, that a speaker must know rule, convention, constitution in order to function as a speaker in an impartial manner. This can be done in this answer. Now moving to the next question, that is debate on the parliamentary privilege revolve around that whether the privilege should be just a power to provide legal immunity for their parliamentary work, or whether it should be extended to the power of contempt of the parliament. Now, this question looks a little bit on a tougher side, but it's simply asking that whether we should limit the parliamentary privileges or not. If you understand the philosophy of the question, that the question is asking that whether we need to put a brake on unlimited power, or you can say on unlimited privilege given to parliamentarians. If you understand this philosophy, then it will be very easy for you to answer it. Now, basic information, you can put some of the articles which is relevant to this. Then article 105194 you can put. Then you can basic input with respect to this question. You can talk about that what is privilege. So can you answer what is privilege? Privilege are nothing but rights and immunities enjoyed by the parliament as an institution and MP in his individual capacity. So basically, privileges is of individual privileges and collective privileges. No need to describe this individual privileges and collective privileges, as this is a 10 marker question. Understood? So basically, just you can put the entire content like this in your introduction. Okay. Now, should be just a power to provide legal immunity. Now make a heading. Yes, to provide legal immunity. Why we need to provide the privileges to the parliamentarians? It is because you will have to understand that free of obstruction or any kind of fear, free from obstruction or any kind of fear is very much required for decision making capacity. Okay. For example, you all know that the parliament has a power to exclude a stranger. It is very important to exclude a stranger sometimes, when the incident of 1967, where some of the stranger have thrown leaflets on the floor of the house. So basically, to exclude a stranger so that such kind of incident does not happen, we need to provide certain kind of immunity. Then you can also provide that providing them right to not appear for the jury services while the parliament session is going on. Again, it is impacting the decision making. So we cannot deny that the parliamentary privileges are required for the MP. However, there are issues with the parliamentary privileges, because this question, or whether it should extend to the power of contempt. So basically, now you will have to give options, or now you will have to give answer, or you can also write ahead of this point, that why we don't need to extend the power of contempt of the parliament. Now coming to that point, why limit to the legal immunity and why not contempt of parliament? Because it has been seen that the parliamentary privileges which is being given to these MP are being, you can say, are being exploited by them to cover up corruption cases. It has been seen that they are using it for covering up the corruption case. An example is AR Antule case. Then you can also say that the freedom of speech and expression which is being granted under 19.1 and which has certain riders in Article 19.2 should be applicable on MP also. MP is also a citizen and he is the representative of the citizen itself. So basically, the qualification or the riders which is being mentioned in 19 clause 2 should be applicable on MP also. Third issue, that they are the judges of their own case. How they are the judges of their own case? Basically, they are defining what privileges are and they are also defining what breach of privileges are. So basically, they are the judges in their own case. Now you can give certain incidents also. For example, recently it happened that the two journalists from Karnataka have written something which parliamentarians consider that it is derogatory, then it has been sent to the privilege committee. So basically, whenever someone is criticizing you, it is not that it is derogatory. It is their right as a journalist to publish what the behavior they are watching on, what the behavior they are watching that the MPs are doing on the floor of the house. So basically, this is a kind of subjugation of the freedom of speech of the journalist. So basically, this case study also you can give in your answer. Now, in conclusion, what you can do? In conclusion, you will have to just mention about that the codification of the parliamentary privileges is required. Understood? Now, moving to the next question. The idea of free and fair election in a democracy requires not only a strict action for the violation of model code of conduct but also a comprehensive amendment. Now this question is little bit on tougher side. It is because you don't know about the different sections of RPA 1951 or different amendments which is required in RPA 1951. So this is the basic information which you need to know. Now I will talk about each and every important provisions of RPA 1951 which has been in the news for the last 2 years and which can be used in writing this answer. Okay, now this is the basic information. Now basic information here, as you look into, there is a mentioning of idea of free and fair election. You should talk about Article 324, or you can also talk about that the free and fair election is the bedrock of parliamentary democracy. Is a bedrock of parliamentary democracy. This kind of things can be used in the introduction. Now, philosophy of the question I have just talked about, that you will have to understand that what are the different issues in the election. For example, if you understand there is an issue of funding, for example, funding. For example, you understand there is an issue of money or expenditure which is being done by the party. If there is an issue of criminalization, if there is an issue of opinion and exit poll, if there is an issue of paid news. So basically, if you understand the philosophy of the issues with respect to the election commission, then you can simply answer this, that is amendment in RPA. Now, I want to tell you one thing which may sound a little bit different, but it is based on the experience, that whenever you are writing the mains, you will face 3 or 4 questions where you don't have a good content but you need to manage such question. And after writing that question, you will feel that I have written this question very well. So basically managing the things which you need to know also. For example, if I don't know that what are the sections which requires to be amendment, or even after that I can easily write answer if I know these points to be included in my answer. So now coming to the exact demand. Now about MCC, we all know that MCC is do's and do nots. Do's and do nots, simple. MCC is legally binding or not? No. Okay, however there is a suggestion or recommendation from the parliamentary standing committee on public grievance, law and justice. Law and justice. They have recommended for making the MCC legally binding. However, the Supreme Court has denied this. But for the sake of answer writing, we will use this. whenever we need, whenever the question is clearly only on my model code of conduct, then you will use both, that the parliamentary standing committee is recommending and Supreme Court is against this. Okay, but here we will not use the Supreme Court. Now, what is the issue with the MCC and why do we need to have the strong MCC implementation? Because recently we have seen with the rise of the hate speeches, now the question arises that hate speeches comes under the model code of conduct or not, or if it comes under the model code of conduct, then what election commission is doing? But the question again arises that what election commission can do? Election commission can do nothing, because it is just a do's and do nots. It is just like a moral obligation on the political party to perform according to the morality set by the election commission in accordance or in consultation with the political parties. So this is the first issue. Second issue with model code of conduct, we all know that model code of conduct will be applicable from date of announcement of election. We all know this. Okay, now for example, the election is going to happen in December, then the ruling party or the party in power can use the government advertisement before 10th December. For example, if 10th December is the announcement, is the date on which the election has been announced, so government can advertise before 10th December. Then election commission is recommending that the ruling party should not use or should not go for the government advertising prior to 6 months from the date of announcement, because basically what is happening, it is disturbing the level playing field. Understood? Now, the next thing, it has been observed that model code of conduct, now it is not being obeyed by the MPs, because what they are doing, they are using the social media platform or electronic media rather than print media or meeting in public. So basically, this social media comes under the regulation of model code of conduct or not. Recently, election commission has asked the members of the political party to give their email ID so that election commission can track it. So these are the things which you can talk about with respect to the model code of conduct. Requires not only a strict action for the violation. For example, these are the violation. You are using the hate speeches. You are using the government advertisement. You are using the social media. This is a kind of violation. Therefore, we need to have a strong implementation. So now coming to the second part, which I will say that this is a tougher part. Okay. Now, just understand this. और रिमेंबर दिस, नॉट अंडरस्टैंड. इसमें समझना तो कुछ है ही नहीं, इसमें तो रटना है. कुछ सेक्शन जान, जस्ट 29B, section 77, 126A, and I will talk about something with respect to this. Okay, so now coming to 29B and section 77. 29B relates to the political funding. Okay, now we all know that an individual, if giving more than 2,000 rupees in donation in cash, then he will have to use the check. You all know. Second thing, section 13 of IT Act says that if the political party wants to take the tax exemption, then he will have to report for the individual donation which is in cash for more than 2,000. But now, okay, this is good, but you will have to bring a proportionate amendment in 29B, because 29B of RPA 1951 is silent and is not talking anything about the donation for more than 2,000 rupees with respect to the election. Now, section 77 of RPA 1951, this section RPA 1951, there is a call for amendment in section 77 so that there can be limit on expenditure by political party. Today what is happening? Today there is a limit of expenditure on the candidate, not on the political party. Therefore there is a recommendation to bring amendment in section 77. Now, section 126A of RPA. What is this section? This section talks about that exit and opinion poll should be banned before 48 hours of the date of polling. Okay. But now the new problem is arising because of the rise of social media, because of the rise of Facebook, Insta, Twitter. Now the demand is to bring an amendment in 126A to include these platforms also. So these are the different demands which you can put up in your answer with respect to comprehensive amendment required in RPA 1951. Now I can give you certain other points to write in. For example, there is also a recommendation to bring a new chapter in the part 5, to bring a new chapter in the part 5 of RPA 1951. What is the new chapter of the part 5? It is recommended by the law sorry, sir. It is recommended by the law commission. Okay, it is recommended by the law commission. What is recommendation? Recommendation is to ban the government advertising prior to 6 months, from the date of announcement of election. This is the recommendation. Okay, so basically these are the things which is required, which you can say that the comprehensive amendment is required. And recently there is one more recommendation to bring an amendment in RPA, that power to derecognize. Today what the condition is that the election commission cannot derecognize political parties, no matter the political parties what they are doing. So basically power to derecognize political party has been recommended by a standing committee, parliamentary standing committee on law and justice. Okay, they have recommended to bring a required amendment in RPA. Now you have 5 points to mention under this head, that is the comprehensive amendment, and 4 points to be mentioned under the model code of conduct. So basically in 50 marker question, 9 points simply means that you are putting approximately about 200 words, and 20-25 words in the introduction, 20-25 in the conclusion. This is the demand of the question. Now coming to the last question, that is CAG to be effective in 21st century requires to be empowered, competent and independent. Okay, now required to be empowered, competent and independent, the basic information which must be in your answer is article 148. Then you can also talk about the CAG. What is the CAG? What if I ask you what is CAG? Then CAG is basically a guardian of public purse. Okay, or I can also say that there are only 3C, or there are 3C to ensure accountability in governance. 3C क्या है? CBI, CVC, CAG. So CAG is one of the institution out of 3C that ensure accountability of the government by maintaining the financial architecture of the government as per under Article 148. If you are giving such a holistic introduction in your answer covering all the important part within 3 or 4 lines, then it will give you an edge in the examination. Now, what is the philosophy of the question? Now, it says that CAG requires to be empowered. Therefore, philosophy is you must be aware about the issues with the CAG. If you are aware about the issues of the CAG, then easily you can divide your answer on empowered, competent and independent. Understood? And examine the role of CAG since its inception. Now, you cannot go in too much history of the CAG since its inception. Just you can talk about that the CAG is auditing the public sector, CAG is auditing the government account, CAG in the 1970s was compiling the account of both center and state, but now only of the state. So this way you can manage the question what is the role of the CAG. Then you can talk about 2G case, coal block allocation case, which has been done in the recent past. Okay. Then you can also talk about that the CAG is basically now auditing the private party also. So these are the things which you can mention here. Now coming to the issues with the CAG. What is the issue with the CAG? If I ask you that what is the issue with the CAG, then what will be your answer? So basically that answer can be from this international organization of supreme auditing institution, of supreme auditing institution. Actually CAG is a member. CAG of all the countries is a member of international organization of supreme auditing institution, has revealed two facts about the CAG. It says that 25% of the CAG report lacks data. ये मत कहो lacks data, कह दो lacks sound data. Okay. And the second issues highlighted by this organization is CAG only highlights issues, not gives solution. These are the issues. Now you can also say that the CAG, when send its report to the president send its report to the parliament send its report to public standing committee, and then public account committee, and then public account committee takes an action on this report, and this CAG plus PSC report is sent to the speaker. But now the issue, there is no any timeline fixed that the speaker must bring that report of the CAG on the house of the parliament. So this is the issue with the CAG. Now another issue with the CAG, for example, there is n number of departments with the government of India, or n number of departments with the government of state. For example, N1 and 2. N1 and 2 are two departments of the center. Now CAG is asking these departments to publish its report so that CAG can audit. Publish its report simply means that the CAG is asking to give the balance sheet of that particular department. But these departments are not sending their reports about the balance sheet within the stipulated time, because the time limit is not fixed. Okay, so these are the different issues. Now I have highlighted 5 different issues with the CAG. Now you can divide your answer that how you will make your CAG competent. Why I am talking about competent? It is because recently NGO Common Cause has said in the Supreme Court that the CAG lacks professional expertise for auditing. Why? It has been observed that in the 2G case, whatever the value they have given, that was the inflated value. But the CAG was telling that it is inflated, or it looks inflated because of the methodology used. We cannot go into the methodology which has been used by the CAG, but you will have to just quote that the NGO Common Cause is questioning the competence of the CAG. Therefore, we need to make our CAG more professional. And how we can make the CAG professional? By training and capacity building of our institution. Now the second point is with respect to independence. How the independence can be ensured? Again, independence can be ensured. For example, there must be a time limit within which a speaker must give his report. For example, it has been recommended that within the 7 days a speaker must lead the report of the CAG in the house of the parliament. Then the next point which you can use in the independence, that there must be an independent scrutiny. There must be an independent scrutiny of the CAG itself, like in Australia. What happens in Australia, that CAG is itself audited by the independent scrutiny. If it is not the case, then what happens in India, that the parliamentarians tries to keep a check on the CAG, and that is more disastrous. When the politicians are trying to keep a check on the CAG, then basically the independence of the CAG has a higher chances of getting distorted. So now this point you can give under the head of independence. Now competence. How you can make your CAG competent? What we can do, like in New Zealand, what happens in New Zealand, the CAG of the New Zealand fixes the liability of the loss. Fixes the liability of the loss on the party. For example, Reliance. Okay, if there is any loss to the government exchequer because of the Reliance, then CAG must have power to fix the liability on the Reliance, which is missing here. So basically, in 21st century, we need to make it more competent by giving power like in New Zealand. Now, it is also recommended that the 1971 Act duties powers of the CAG 1971 Act should be amended, and there must be a mentioning of private party audit by the CAG. Though the Supreme Court has clearly said that the CAG can go for the auditing of the private firms if there is a revenue sharing agreement with the government and there is a loss on the Consolidated Fund of India, but it should be directly revealed or it should be directly mentioned in the act which gives power to the CAG. Okay, so basically these are the things which you can mention in your answer. Now, to make it more competent also, or sorry, to make it more empowered also, this is the point under the head of empowered. We have talked about the competence and independence. So basically empowered, these are the points under the head of empowered, sorry. So now basically what you can do, one point you can mention here, that there must be penalties. For what? For example, if the department is not giving the information within the stipulated time, then CAG must be empowered to impose penalties on such departments. So basically, these are the different points which you can use in your answer. I hope that whatever I have tried to put to increase your knowledge or to increase your understanding with respect to the question, I have succeeded in that part. I am just hoping that. And now, after the test discussion, what you can do, you can send question to us, and then you can have the personal one-to-one communication with me. Okay, so we will generate some kind of system, and we will put it on the Telegram channel so that you can directly connect to me after submitting your answer. So my suggestion is to read this or to watch this video and try to absorb as much point which I have discussed. In this way, the topic